Matthew Shepard. If that name doesn't mean anything to you right now, it will soon. His horrifying story is one that shook Americans of all genders and sexualities because it showed just how far we still have to go in the LGBTQ rights movement. In October of 1998, Shepard was brutally attacked and left to die, tied up to a fence just for being gay. The news of this tragedy was felt by the entire country and led to a series of protests on both sides. One of the groups that led the anti-gay protests was the Westboro Baptist Church, an organization known for its extreme homophobia. Now, it isn't just speculation that Matthew Shepard was killed for being gay. His killers openly admitted it. In fact, they tried to justify their actions using a legal strategy that is, simply put, a step in the wrong direction in an increasingly accepting society. This is called the Gay and Trans Panic Defense, or more broadly, the LGBTQ Panic Defense, and is defined by the LGBT bar as a legal strategy which asks a jury to find that a victim's sexual orientation or gender identity is to blame for the defendant's violent reaction, including murder. It's as horrifying as it sounds. Behind race and religion, sexual orientation is ranked as the third highest motivator for hate crimes in the United States. 1 in 5 lesbian, gay, or bisexual people and 1 in 4 transgender people will experience a hate crime in their lifetime. Things are nowhere near perfect, but they're definitely better. The Stonewall Uprising in 1969 marked a huge part of the movement that fought a centuries-old homophobic American legal system. This was a series of protests after a violent police raid on the Stonewall Inn, which is a gay bar in New York. Exactly 1 year later was the first Pride Parade, which is a tradition that has been kept up for the past 50 years. About 10 years later, the HIV and AIDS epidemic began, which brought with it a whole new wave of homophobia. Skipping ahead to 2015, the Supreme Court finally legalized same-sex marriage with a historic 5-4 or Burgerville v. Hodges decision. Now, 5 years later, we have to ask, how much has really changed? As of October 2020, at least 36 transgender or gender nonconforming people have been killed. This is the highest it's ever been at this point in any given year. And remember how I mentioned the LGBTQ Panic Defense earlier? It's still legal in 39 states. Think about that for a second. Chances are if you live in the US, you live in one of those states. A state where, whether you identify as gay, trans, both, or neither, you can be killed and not get justice because your killer can claim that they panicked due to how you identify. In 2018, 2 Democratic congressmen from Massachusetts introduced the Gay and Trans Panic Defense Prohibition Act of 2018, but both of the bills involved died in committee. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris joined them in supporting these bills, citing Matthew Shepard's story as a wake-up call for how horrific this legal defense can be. She was also instrumental in California becoming the first state to ban the LGBTQ Panic Defense in 2014 during her time as Attorney General. If you're anything like any of the people that I've talked to about this, you probably had no idea what the LGBTQ Panic Defense is. There's a reason for this. A huge part about how we get our information is through media and news outlets, so if something isn't reported on, we don't hear about it. After this legal strategy has been used for so long without any legislation on a federal level, it's boring to report about it, and eventually we forget it exists at all. As said by the LGBT bar, by fully or partially acquitting the perpetrators of crimes against LGBTQ+ victims, this defense implies that LGBTQ+ lives are worth less than others. We cannot allow people to believe that homophobia or transphobia are okay. There is no mold for what a queer person looks like, so it's easy to overlook their struggles. Privilege, too, comes in many different forms, not only based on race, but also based on gender identity or sexual or romantic orientation. So I brought some people together to show what this looks like, and if you're having a hard time understanding, maybe you should join in. Start with 10 fingers up, and well, you'll see. Put a finger down if you can't show affection for your romantic partner in public without fear of ridicule or violence. Put a finger down if you haven't grown up seeing people like you holding public office. Put a finger down if you've had your rights debated in class or on television. Put a finger down if you didn't get to study the culture or history of people like you in school. Put a finger down if you've ever been the only person of your gender or sexual or romantic orientation in a classroom or workplace setting. Put a finger down if you've ever been told that you're going to hell for being you. Put a finger down if you've ever been told that you're faking your gender and/or sexuality. Put a finger down if, when people find out your gender identity or sexual or romantic orientation, you're met with slurs or hatred. Put a finger down if there are organizations and people who have made it their goal to take away your rights. put a finger down if, in some places, it's illegal for you to use the restroom for the gender with which you identify, or there isn't one at all. Out of these people, 2 were left without any fingers still up. One of them identifies as gender fluid and pansexual, and the other identifies as pangender, asexual, and queer. On average, people who identify as both cisgender and heterosexual had 7 fingers up, while people who are members of the LGBTQ+ community only had about 2.6 on average. This means that queer people are almost 3 times more likely to put a finger down for any given question. And if you want to separate it even more, trans people had less than 1 finger up on average, whereas people who identify as cisgender and are still a part of the LGBTQ+ community had an average of 3.3 fingers up. Privilege isn't something that we can directly see, taste, touch, smell, or hear, but it is something that shapes our society and how we interact with one another. You'll notice I didn't have any questions about having to search for hours just to find a few minutes of representation in TV shows or movies. I didn't point out that it's illegal to be gay in 72 countries. In 11 of those countries, it's punishable by death. And I didn't mention that in 39 states, it's legal to be killed due to your gender identity or sexual or romantic orientation. The LGBTQ Panic Defense needs to be banned. These are human lives at stake, and we can't just sit around hoping that some change will happen. If history has taught us anything, it's that change doesn't come unless we the people stand up and fight for it. So write to your elected officials or protest in the streets. We can't let people believe that this legal strategy died with Matthew Shepard.